Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Film Studies. Today, we begin a really significant film for a number of reasons. Among them, 1933, we're literally right in the middle of the worst part of the Great Depression in our country. In 1933, there was 25% unemployment. Those are almost like revolution numbers, guys, where you have 1 in 4 Americans who were unable to find a job during the Great Depression. And as we've mentioned, many industries were hurting at the time as a result of the Depression. And the film industry was not excluded from this, but let's just say that they enjoyed a bit more success because for just a little while people could forget about how miserable they were in their life by going to the movie. When the lights turned down, they could sort of lose themselves in a world of fantasy for just a little while. Now, King Kong's a very, like I say, very significant film for a number of reasons. Among them, the fact that we see evidence of the Depression in the film. As you guys saw, there is a bread line in the movie, a soup line at the beginning of the film, where the producer of the film that they're going to be making finds Ann Darrow near a bread line. She's trying to steal just to survive. So the greatest and most famous classic adventure fantasy and part horror film of all time is King Kong. Producers and directors Marion C. Cooper and Ernst Schoendack, both real-life adventurers and film documentarians, conceived of this low-budget story of a beautiful, plucky blonde, played by the great Fay Wray, and a frightening, gigantic 50-foot ape monster as a metaphoric retelling of the archetypal Beauty and the Beast fable. Fay Wray mistakenly believed that her RKO film star, the tallest, darkest leading man in Hollywood, would be Cary Grant rather than the Beast. Later in her life, she would title her autobiography, On the Other Hand, in memory of her squirming around in King Kong's grip. RKO was a really, I guess of the 5 major studios, it was the strangest, mainly because it changed studio heads so often, and because you had weirdos like Howard Hughes running the show, but they never really developed an identity per se, like MGM or Warner Brothers. RKO made everything from King Kong to Citizen Kane, so they really were just bouncing around all over the place and hence were never able to develop an identity per se. The major themes of King Kong include the struggle for survival on the primitive fog-enshrouded tropical Skull Island between the ardent and energetic filmmakers, the hero, the voodoo natives, and the forces of nature, unrequited love, and the frustration and repression of violent personal desires. However, the primitive giant ape must also struggle against the forces of urban civilization and technology when it's exploited for profit and returned for display in New York City during a time of economic oppression, of course, during the Great Depression. Some people believe that King Kong's rage and the fact that he smashes so much in New York is an expression of how a lot of people were feeling during the Depression, angry about the economic conditions, and King Kong was an outlet for them to watch him smash all of these great pillars of capitalism that many people believed had led to this terrible depression. So here we have a theatrical poster for King Kong. If you could find that baby right there in good shape, oh my goodness, you would really have a collectible on your hands. Here's a publicity still of King Kong towering over a 1933 New York City. So much of this film is neat. You get to see Times Square in the middle of the Depression, the skyline of New York City during 1933. Just a really interesting look into what's going on in America in 1933, which is part of this class that I hope you pick up on, just like you picked up on it in The Public Enemy, what's going on in America. So there's the beautiful Fay Wray over there on the left, and she became known as the Queen of Scream, rightfully so. You heard her scream and scream. And there's another wonderful theatrical poster on the right. By now, you're probably beginning to see that theatrical posters are an art form in their own right. Now, today, they're just dreadful and terrible. But at that time, the lobby cards, the theatrical posters, are just absolutely works of art to sit back and admire. And there's Kong on top of the Empire State Building, and he grabs one of the planes and throws it to the ground. Now, you'll take a look at this particular shot. Now, I'm going to talk more about something regarding this particular scene here pretty soon. This wonderful scene where the guys are on the log, they're trying to cross back over. You see King Kong trying to shake them off there as they fall into that great big pit. Notice on the right something that you didn't see during that particular scene of the movie. Look at that Triceratops thing, or a Styracosaurus. That's what it is. That's over there on the right. And I always wondered when I was growing up, why did those guys not just walk back to the other side? And it just never occurred to me that there might be something on the other side. Well, the most famous deleted scene in all of movie history was called the spider pit sequence of this movie. And in the original cut of the film that was only shown one time, there was a scene where after the big brontosaurus attack and they're running and being chased, and they run into this Styracosaurus who chases them onto the log and kills a couple of them before they get there. And they're trapped. If they've got King Kong on one side and this dinosaur on the other. This is actually the only known still of the spider pit sequence from the movie. And what happens here is that after Kong shakes them off, there was a scene where the guys wake up and find themselves at the bottom of this ravine surrounded by all these horrible creatures, lizards and octopus-looking things and giant spiders, and they all meet gruesome fates. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this scene as we get toward the end of this presentation. This remarkable film received no Academy Award nominations, but would have won in the special effects category, really important innovations that we're getting ready to talk about, had there been such a category at the time. The film contained many revolutionary technical innovations for its time, including rear projection, miniature models that were about 18 inches in height, and trick photography, and some of the most phenomenal stop-motion animation sequences and special effects ever filmed by Chief Technician Willis O'Brien, famed for his first feature film, The Lost World, in 1925. It's about dinosaurs. So, rear projection is a technique for simulating location cinematography by projecting a photographic image of a landscape onto a screen. Actors are photographed standing in front of the screen as if they were part of the represented location. It would be like me interacting with my smartboard. So you shoot me from behind as if I was interacting with what was going on my smartboard. And it looks as though you've got an exotic location and things are going on in that location that you are interacting with. Stop motion animation is an art form in and of itself and a method used for animating three-dimensional models such as King Kong. The model is moved a little bit and photographed a frame at a time. It would be like if you were to get a Barbie doll or something and move the arm a little bit and take a picture, and move the arm a little bit more and take a picture. And then you run all these images together to create or simulate movement. The most famous stop-motion animator of all time is a guy by the name of Ray Harryhausen. And Ray Harryhausen was famous for a lot of things, a lot of movies, but among them the Sinbad movies, and my favorite stop-motion animation feature film of all time called Clash of the Titans. Not the newer one, but the original one. And the stop-motion Medusa still haunts my dreams. A wildly dramatic musical score by the great Max Steiner, who's also going to compose the soundtrack to Gone with the Wind, enhanced the action of the story. It was the very first feature-length musical score written specifically for a U.S. talkie, and was the first major Hollywood film to have a thematic score rather than simply background music, recorded using a 46-piece orchestra. After the score was completed, all the film's sounds were recorded onto 3 separate tracks, one for sound effects, dialogue, and music. For the very first time in movie history, RKO's sound department head made groundbreaking sound design decision. He pitched the effects to match the score so they wouldn't be overwhelming and actually complement one another. So the soundtrack was actually built around this movie to where you had, if there was an action sequence, the music would actually complement the action sequence rather than overwhelm it. So the music is actually going to match what is on the screen. This is called melodrama, and we talked about a little bit about that when we saw The Birth of a Nation. But this is the very first time this innovation has happened in a movie before. The film has numerous memorable moments, including Kong's battle with a giant snake in a misty cavern, his struggle against a flying pterodactyl, the screaming beauty Fay Wray held captive in Kong's giant clenched palm, and the finale with the defiant Kong atop the Empire State Building while circling aircraft ultimately shoot him down. King Kong launched the giant beast subgenre of science fiction, inspiring the 1950s atomic mutant creature features and Japanese giant movie monsters like Godzilla, Gamera, Rodan, and Godzilla and King Kong would actually face off in the Japanese film King Kong vs. Godzilla in 1962. 3 guesses, first 2 don't count. Who won in that contest between King Kong and Godzilla? It's a Japanese movie. Is your hint there. In the original script, the gorilla is named Kong. The film was then entitled The Eighth Wonder, and press booklets were sent off to thousands of movie theaters in 1932 to excite theater owners into placing the Eighth Wonder onto their advertisements. King was added to the title by studio publicists. Apart from the opening titles, the only time the name King Kong appears in the picture is on the marquee above the theater where Kong is being exhibited. And the marquee was in fact added to the scene as an optical composite after the live footage to the theater entrance had been shot. However, Carl Denham does refer to Kong in his speech as a king and a god in the world that he knew. This is some interesting trivia for you. The giant gate used in the 1933 movie was burned along with other old studio sets for the burning of Atlanta scene in Gone with the Wind. It was actually the very first scene shot for Gone with the Wind. They needed something to simulate the burning down of Atlanta, so they would actually burn down the giant gate that separated the natives from King Kong in this film. Okay, so here we go. I made reference to the Lost Spider Pit sequence a few minutes ago. The first version of the film was test screened to an audience in San Bernardino, California in January 1933, before the official release of the film. At that time, the film contained a scene showing what happened to the unfortunate sailors who got shaken from the log by Kong, showing that they were eaten alive at the bottom of the ravine by a giant spider, a big crab-looking thing, a giant lizard, and an octopus-type creature. There's a sequence in which a large lizard that does climb up to Jack, and Jack cuts the vine and the lizard that falls down into the pit that was left in the film. So I'm sure you remember seeing that. The spider pit scene provoked many members of the audience to scream, leave the theater, and even faint. However, a memo written by a fellow familiar with what happened recently revealed on a King Kong documentary that indicates the scene was cut because it slowed down the pace of the film, not because it was too horrific. This is incorrect. In fact, Hollywood was being pressured by Washington to not be as explicit, and it was a pretty horrifying sequence. So there was pressure put on them to actually take the scene out of the movie, and it did. And you guys are going to get to watch that scene today. According to King Kong Cometh by Paul Wood, the scene did not get past censors, and audiences only claimed to have seen the sequence. Now, what happens is that Peter Jackson, who remade King Kong in 2005, who you guys may know as the director of Lord of the Rings, just for fun, made the spider pit sequence with some friends, just for something to do. And if I had actually woven this scene into the film that you guys watched, you would have never even known the difference. It's that good. So based on the script that we still have and a few stills of what the monsters looked like, Peter Jackson recreated the spider pit sequence. And you guys are going to get to watch it. It's such a cool scene. And I can't imagine that the real thing would have been that different. Stills from the scene exist, but the footage itself remains lost to this day. A very common practice. It's not like they had Blu-ray discs to include deleted scenes on like we do today. But at that time, usually when something was cut from a movie, it was burned, just destroyed. There was no sense in keeping it around. So many presume that the spider pit sequence met the same fate. But I'm so excited you guys are going to get to see it. King Kong was re-released for the first time in 1938, but suffered from censorship cuts. The Hays Office, in accordance with stiffer decency rules, removed a few scenes from the film that were considered violent or obscene. Cannot wait for you guys to hear about the production code, which is coming up soon. The reason we haven't talked about it yet is because it didn't start being rigidly enforced until mid-1934, and we're just simply chronologically not there yet. Now, you could probably imagine what scenes would be cut from this movie, but things like the brontosaurus biting sailors to death in the swamp, King Kong peeling off Ann Darrow's dress, Kong's violent attack on the native village, including 2 shots of Kong squishing natives with his foot, Kong biting a New Yorker to death, Kong dropping a lady to her death after mistaking her for Ann. Yeah, you guys ain't heard nothing. Just wait till we talk about the code. It's the most horrifying thing ever, the fact that it actually existed in our country. Unbelievable. Okay, so I hope that you guys enjoyed King Kong, and now I entreat you to now watch the Lost Spider Pit sequence as reimagined by Peter Jackson in 2005. Don't forget to submit your notes. Have a great day, everybody.